Hello, good afternoon. I'd just like to say thank you to everyone for joining us and traveling from here and there to come to the lecture today. Very pleased to have the opportunity to recognize the 2009 Raphael Prize winner, Christian Burchard, and I'm not going to take a lot of time to talk about his background because he has a great presentation ready. But I do want to take the opportunity to present an award that was beautifully designed by Steve Lohr and the students at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. So, Christian, I'd like to recognize you with this award.
Thank you.
And yeah, without further ado, Christian Burchard.
Okay.
You want me to hold on?
Well, thank you all for coming here. I have about 50 or 60 slides I want to show where I'm coming from. And one of the questions was really the process. How do I do the work I do? And where am I coming from with my ideas? But first I want to say how honored I am to get this award. There aren't very many awards in our fields. And to be seen, you know, is something most of us aspire to. To be seen and recognized for what we do, working by ourselves most of the time, is just really, it's a real treat. So I'm really grateful for that. Okay, let me get going here right away. And that little bar is going to stay on there because I'm running it out of my mat. I live in a gorgeous place. I live in the Rogue Valley in Southern Oregon. And I'm very much affected by the way I live. I mean, I live surrounded by vineyards, horse farms. Ashland has Shakespeare Festival, so, you know, there's a bit of culture too. And I can be in 3 hours on the ocean, 2 hours in the Redwood National Park, Crater Lake. I can go skiing in 35 minutes. And this is the view from my shop. So this is Southern Oregon. I mean, where I live is right between Portland and San Francisco, so we're right on the California border, so it's not really Northwest anymore. Lots of grapes, peaches. It's well known for its pear growing, and a lot of people come there for rafting. We got, you know, rafting, fly fishing. So, you know, it's really nice to be surrounded by that much. And here's one more view. And it's mountains. I can step. This is probably, if you live here, a little different. I can step out of my house, go past the next property, and for 100 miles, just trees. So, which brings in, you know, animals. We have bobcat, cougar, bears once in a while, lots of coyotes. And so, we do have snow. Not a whole lot. It's mostly higher. We're like 2,500 feet, so, you know, very hot in the summer. So what I've been a woodworker for about 30 years. Just quickly where I'm coming from, I've been trained as a furniture maker. I come from Germany. You'll hear that in between more and more. And I was trained as a furniture maker in a very, very conservative approach. German tradition, so I'm like a journeyman furniture maker. And when I came over here, I studied art and sculpture, drawing. I went to the museum school in Boston, Emily Carr College of Art and Design in Vancouver. And then, you know, you come out of art school, you can't make any money with any of that kind of stuff. So it was building houses, timber framing, starting into furniture, and then I've been a turner for probably 20 years, self-taught. And so I have done dry wood. That's what I'm saying. I can do flat dovetails, things up to the whatever hundreds of an inch. And over the years, I've gotten more into wood turning, and there's a tree in and I've been trying to use more of our local materials. So madrone is something that I got hooked onto, which is an arbutus. It's a tree that grows from Santa Barbara up to Vancouver Island. It's a flowering evergreen. You can't plant it. You can't take it anywhere else in the world. I mean, I've seen it in southern Turkey and supposedly in Chile along the coast. It's very climate oriented. It needs a certain climate and will only live in that. It is the premier firewood in our area because it's very dry and it's very hard when it's dry. But there's lots of it. What it does, it burrows in the root. And it's used for veneer. These guys haul it out of the woods, ship it to Italy, Japan, different places, cut it for veneer. And there's a lot around us. And every once in a while somebody says, hey, I got this big burl, and I would use it. What's with madrone, it has a very high water content and a very unstable grain structure. And so I turn these beautiful forms out of it, and it just completely changes as it dries. So you need to see wood as a collection of cells. A tree like that has a lot of cells. They're elongated. They have water between the cells and in the cells. When that water leaves, you get shrinkage. Most woodworker like it when it's dry and it will not move anymore. But over the years, I got more and more intrigued with this stuff. And because there was so much of it, and when you use it green, it's the most wonderful material you've ever used. There's so much water in it that you turn it on a lathe that cuts beautiful. You cut it with a chainsaw, with a bandsaw. It, slightly unfocused picture, but look at this. It's like has a kind of peeling bark. It's a really messy tree. And don't worry, the rest of the pictures are more focused. It was like very quick the day before I left, and I kind of messed up. So you put your hand on this tree, and it's ice cold. I mean, you can feel the water in there. So when you turn it on the lathe, okay, this is what I work with. So these are they're harvesting these burls in the woods. And so when I'm looking at that, I have to start reading what's actually happening inside of this. Somewhere there's a straight trunk with the little burls on it. There's a lot of burls on the bottom, and then you have the root. A lot of people ask me, well, do we have anything like that? Well, if you want to start digging up trees, dealing with rock, stones, dirt, and just kind of hauling this is not like I can't get a log and just start at it with a chainsaw. So there's a lot of preparation. It's really rough stuff. So they haul it. I used to, do all my own chainsawing. Now I have guys who kind of help me with that. But that's pretty much, this is the raw material that I work with. A burl is just an explosion of growth. It doesn't hurt the tree, and you can see that in some of the photos of what it actually looks like on the inside. But just to show you, how much work, for example, is ahead of time before I even have this material. We're talking big guys, big chainsaws, lots of noise. And so I need to start, when it comes like that, I have an idea what's happening inside. Sometimes they're kind of rotten inside. So you just start cutting it. And for the wall pieces I do here, what we do, we cut these big blocks out. So inside is just lovely. It had pinks, Sometimes the further you go down the root, it gets dark red. So you get incredible colors. And it is dripping wet. So see, at this point, to actually get a square block out of something this wild is not so easy. So you have a huge amount of waste. And these guys working together, I mean, I don't have the muscles to do that anymore, but these guys can actually make perfect 3-foot long cuts. And then what happens, I get these kind of blocks, and I keep my wood wet. So I work differently. Most woodworkers want to get the wood dry and then cover it. I wax everything, and then it gets wrapped in sheets of plastic till I start working with it. I don't want any movement, any cracking, till I actually work it. So this was a fairly big one, and then last fall, I do have to show these pictures, I got this little burl. These guys called me up, I said, I need about 1,000-pound burl. And it was in the middle of summer where you can't get any woods because the forests are closed, you can't go in with chainsaws because of fire danger. And they said, well, we're getting something, it might be a little bigger than what you had wanted. And I arrived there, and it was just like, oh my God. So this is 6,000 pounds of burl. And I'm just one guy. And so we play around a little bit, and they go, well, how much of it do you want? It's like, are you kidding me? I've never seen such a thing. Of course I want the whole thing. And then comes the bickering over the price, because this gets sold by the pound. And when this is veneer grade, we're talking $1.50 a pound. It gets pretty expensive. So every time you make a chainsaw cut, there's $10 right there on the ground. So, and I feel, first I feel terribly guilty that I've been part of the death of this tree, because this is really, I have never seen anything like this. And there was a development somewhere they put in, the tree had to come out. And once we started to cut in and realized that the tree was dying, it was like, okay, I'm off the hook. You know, this thing was turning into sawdust anyway. So then, I mean, then you just do this typical, you just walk around for an hour to figure out where do we start? How do we cut this up? Because once you cut, you know, working with wood, most of the time the way I work is a subtractive process. So once you cut, you can't go back. And he loves this stuff, you know. He's got a lot of adrenaline. So that's when we realized the tree was dying. So what you've got in here, you've got, this is dying, this is dead. So there will be no movement. Once you cut this, there's no movement even after it's dry. It's wet, but the cells have broken down. All the growth comes from here up. So you can see there's so much going on here. So you have to read that and then start playing with it. So these are the first cut, but you can see the colors are actually, this is pretty true to the colors. And then 2 or 3 more cuts just to be able to get it into a truck and haul it. And then this is on my place and I'm getting hand help unloading it, and then everything gets wrapped up and then I slowly start working with it. So of course the form totally influences what I do. I've never had a burl that is like 6 feet tall. And like the skinny tall pieces over there, I made pieces like that 6 feet. I mean, all of a sudden, I have a 32-inch bandsaw. The thing was way too small to cut anything like that. All of a sudden, I'm like, you know, dealing with different, but it's so much fun. You know, it makes you feel, you stick a chainsaw in that, you feel so macho, it's just like, you know, you're really moving things. But you have to be careful moving the very heavy. I mean, each one of these blocks would be 1,500, 2,000 pounds. That's when you get young people with strong backs. So, you remember the blocks that were covered in wax? What happens with those, and I don't have a picture of that, we take these blocks to a horizontal bandsaw mill. So my early ones, we took little blocks and I cut them actually by hand on the bandsaw, which by the time you start getting 16 inches high and you get a 100-pound block, gets a little scary and not that easy to make straight cuts. What we do now, they go on a wood miser, which is a horizontal bandsaw mill. So you just tilt the bandsaw horizontal, you have this big block sitting there, and the saw just goes over and we cut 1/8-inch slabs. So within 4 or 5 hours, I have maybe, you know, 100, 150 slices. That's enough to keep me busy for like 5 years. So, and this is how they're dried. So, you know, when you work with wood like madrone, it has a lot. It has a lot of its own life. You know, mostly woodworking is like you've got dry wood and you're in charge. So what I had to learn is like to let the stuff do what it wants to do and work together with it. So over the years, you know, I had to learn it, and the more I force it, the less I get really good pieces. So to learn to really work closely with it, not so simple. So this is what it looks like wet. And I put them in the garage, and I stand them up because I don't want to force their shape. The madrone will move according to its grain structure. That's why I talked earlier. You got all these cells aligned in some way. You see all these wild, beautiful patterns. The patterns are created by the way the cells are aligned. The beauty of the wood that you see is there's color, but then the grain pattern is the way the grains, the cells sit. So as the water leaves the cells and the places between the cells, you have movement, you have shrinking, everything contracts. So these panels will shrink up to 20%, which is really frustrating if you make work on the lathe and you make this nice big piece. 20% is a lot. You know, it just shrinks till it, you know, you get, you know, the right moisture, the same moisture that you are wherever you kind of live. So I leave them alone. Once in a while, you suddenly, you know, stack them like this, leave them alone, close the garage, and then let it sit. And, you know, because it needs to go slow. If you dry this too fast, it cracks, it all flies apart. Sometimes they break. I mean, I lose maybe 20, 30% of these. Because sometimes you go into end grain, and that will just not stay together. On the other hand, sometimes you can actually you take a slice like this, you cut it in end grain, it turns into its own bowl. But you need to slow the drying down. So I stand them up like this, that it can really do what it needs to do without interfering on my part. And then once in a while you come down, they all fall over. They all stand back up again. And that would be the next step. So what I do, I dry them, I select them, I cut them, I trim them, whatever. This is the very first piece I've done. And actually, idea came early one morning with Johannes Michelson. That's why this first piece was called Another Tequila Sunrise. And we just kind of, what we played, what happens when you hang them on the wall just with the wood color, it looks like slices of wood on the wall. And so that's where my whole bleaching comes in. It's like I'm taking the color out because there's too much information. And this way, you can really see what happens inside. And you can see why the movement did what it did. So this is a very quiet piece, you know, and this was still done on the bandsaw. And I always work with, I like the defects. I like what's wrong with it. So if you have cracks, fix the cracks. Instead of getting rid of the crack, I use the crack and it gives it like, makes it feel like it's been somewhere. There's a story, this has been around. And you can see how important the light is, for example, for these pieces. If you light them right, they really, you know, all the shadows behind it create a much, much bigger piece. This is, I don't think you could do anything more simple with wood. I mean, really, all I'm doing is making these thin slices. And then there's a hanger on the wall, and I do different variations of that. So then, the trick for me is, and what I'm learning is then, it's not so much how good I am at making it, it's how much I can read what's there. Because I have, like, I cut a lot of these panels, and most of them, I look at them, I don't know what to do with it. And maybe 2 years later, I walk in there and I go, I never saw that. Because I've changed, you know. So this is all cut from one block. Each one moves a little different, but there's still relationships. And then, you know, so wood doesn't have to be stayed, doesn't have to be hard, doesn't have to have a soft surface. There's so much movement possible. And that's what, you know, so what happens, I get a lot back. You know, normally it's all me doing stuff to the wood. Here, I leave it alone and I come back and I go, oh my God. So there's a lot of gifts coming back. This is like at the Bellevue Museum of Arts in, you know, Bellevue, but each one of these panels is 3.5 feet by 2 feet. So that's why, you know, the detail is much, you know, what happens on the surface is much smaller. This is actually the very piece that's here. So what I do, you know, a friend came in, I had all these squares on the wall. He goes, well, why don't you just do this? It's, you know, I always try to get when I'm stuck, I try to get other people in my studio and just like brainstorm because I get very dense. I look at the same stuff, nothing happens. And so a whole series came out of that. And, you know, some of them, this is more, it's called East of Tobruk, you know, landscape imagery, satellite photos. Just, you know, there's all that stuff going on. And I play with it and try to create some kind of, you know, a rhythm. And then once in a while, and it started with these pieces, we cut these big blocks. And it's like torso. So a lot of body parts over the years. I have quite a few of them. And you know, often women see males and males see women. And I've had some people being totally creeped out when I start sewing it together. I do it anyway, but people, you know, no, I can't even look at that, you know, because it felt like scarring, it felt like surgery. But for me, it's just really, when I see a big crack in there, it feels a little too fragile, a little too loose, and I bring it back, which is the same as the Nakashima butterfly. You know, I realized that from my furniture, there's a lot of things that came right in here. And again, the work here is, I forgot a few steps. You know, I dry it, then I sandblast it. Once I set them up the way I put them on the wall, then I sandblast everything. And that's not done in the cabinet, but outside with a big pressure pot. And what it does, it just softens the surface. It gets, you know, it comes off the bandsaw. There's like purple marks from the metal of the blade, you know, reacting to the wet sawdust. You got fingerprints on all that, and the sandblasting just cleans that up, and then I bleach them. And I'm using a wood bleach. You know, every hardware can buy that in the hardware store. It's normally used for, you know, if you kitchen cabinets, they all have a little bit different color. Before you stain it, you do 2-3 coats of bleach and then you stain it and it has an even kind of color. It's not meant to go this far. But you can go, what happens when you first bleach it, it actually gets stronger color You've got two chemicals in there. There's hydrogen peroxide and sodium something. One pulls the color out, the other one does the color in. So it gets very splotchy, looks ugly over the next few steps. But when you brush it on and it dries, it's not a soaking process. And then after a while, and then I can see how far I want to go, how white I want to go. And I don't want to go totally white. I want to get this ivory kind of color. And, and my struggle is always, so how much do I just step back and when do I get back in and put my mark? Because just to make those panels after a while gets a little boring for me. Suddenly I go, okay, I want to do something with it. And there's plenty of pieces I've totally murdered because I went way too far, not enough respect was there. And with these, I was like, I started one of those and it's set in the corner and I really can't, I'm not really comfortable, and other people say, oh, that's really interesting. So I go, okay, let's see. And I went more and more in there. It's really hard to go in there. You can mess this up so easily. So I went in there and started burning and focusing on certain kind of areas. And I use a little burning tool. It's just a little burning thing with a little spiral. And I just use, you can do burn every which way. I mean, wood and fire, wood, bleach, fire work together really well. And I just use that little spiral, and then it glows, and I go in there, and actually the whole area gets black. I make very strong marks. Then I go in there, sandblast everything back out, re-bleach it, but there's the indentation still left, and you can see that there's all these little marks that are barely there, so the stuff just kind of fades away, so it doesn't become so harsh. And then I can go in there and make very, very subtle kind of marks. And then I started to get this title of this, to play a little bit more, I don't have, so it's always a progression, you first start with all the panels the same, and then I got all these leftover pieces, and then I really started to, arrange them in different ways, and some of them have some burning. At this point, I get interested, what kind of story can I tell, and just, my idea is always not to go too far, so just go a little bit and just touch on certain areas to give the viewer a lot of space to do what they want to do. I don't like to have it, and I always hear people see all kinds of different things in there, and I really do like that. And sometimes pieces didn't work, and I can use those part, and I've just done one, I think there's some picture of Fuller Museum, it's like 20 feet of that. So then I got really bored and I went in there and just like really mess with it. How far can I take that? And like tread marks, rain, tread marks. I don't have a better photo. I don't think I have a better photo of it. And then there's a few drawings that started to play. This one actually, I did actually make it. My sketchbook is really messy. I go very quick. It's just really short ideas, so I just don't lose them. Because once I start working, things will change anyway. So this is when you have to burn with a large fan on the side because there's a lot of smoke coming up there. And you can see here the different graduation. You can go really, really deep. This got changed so many times. I sandblasted it all back out, went all back in again. And, I was really surprised somebody actually bought it. I wasn't all that fond of it. But I always bounce back and forth, how much of myself to put in and how much to let the wood talk. And, there's just really, I'm bouncing back and forth there. And I always have people who go at night, look at the wall pieces and go, that's all you do? They ask me how to do it, and I go, yeah. I'm not, as I said, I've been a woodworker for a long time. I'm fairly good at it, but I'm not that interested anymore in work that's all about how good you are at making it. There's a lot of it, and it just leaves me cold. Unless it's so good that you just, it's unbelievable. So this is an older piece. I don't know whether I like it. But, what I do here, I finish this piece, and then I go in there and re-sandblast through the bleach. So there's a lot of possibility, a lot of things I haven't tried out, where you really just take the white panel and then start going in there because you just mask an area off and then sandblast around it, burn it. I have all kinds of drawings at this point. But I go back and forth. When I was done with it, I hated it. Someone Motherwell said it, as an artist, you're the worst judge of your own work. You know, you really don't know what you're doing. Just do what you're doing and have other people judge it. Because sometimes, like 10 years later, I go, oh my God, that was an incredible piece, you know? And I burn a lot of my work. You know, madrone is great firewood. I work in the inside of my shop, I maybe work 20, 30 pieces, the rest starts going to the outside. Whatever's most interested comes in the middle, interesting, and I work with it. The rest goes on the outside. At the end of the year, I took half of the pieces on the outside and burn them. It's a great relief. Shop's empty, I have an empty canvas and I start, you know, you can really, you know, suffocate under your nearly finished or work where I maybe can do something with because you spent the time with it. Some of this work goes so fast. You know, some of the pieces don't take that long that actually I know that a certain amount will fail, and it's part of the process and part of my price. I do a lot of books. I mean, I have a lot of leftovers. These little thin pieces that I never knew what to do. These are books. Oh, this is actually the two pieces here are the finished pair of books that is right there on the other side of the wall. So they come out. And these early ones, I would just leave it and let them dry like that. What I do now, I microwave them. I don't have a microwave in the kitchen. I have 3 in the shop because it heats them from the inside out. It dries them from the inside out. The danger with doing it like this is that the outside, what you can see happening, they start opening up. The inside is totally wet, but the outer page is dry. If you think there's 20% shrinkage, that creates so much stresses that the whole thing just flies apart. Doing it in the microwave, you heat it up from the inside, you soften the pages, I put a lot of wedges inside, and then it can dry evenly. So, 3 hours later. And to me, I'm having a blast in this kind of stuff, you know. So that's another thing why I'm using madrone. It is just a pleasure to work with. As far as I'm concerned, you know, if I'm in my shop working with wood all the time, I want to have a good time. This thing of, you know, my shop, I create very little dust. I don't sand a whole lot anymore. I don't know who enjoys sanding, but somehow that's what everybody does. And I sand the edges and I hire somebody to do that. So that's maybe like a day and a half later, but you can see those massive ones here have actually done very, very little. But you see a lot of cracking here. So, you know, after I started using the microwave, you know, I can really prevent most of the cracking because the wood, you know, the microwave boils the water in the cells, pushes it out. When you take it out of the microwave, there's steam shooting out these things. And then that's the finished object. So, and again, with making the books, you still get some cracking. I'll lose maybe 30, 40%. And then I go sandblast them, bleach them, and I always bring the edge back. Even all those panels, there's always the natural color still showing on the edges. But what it does, you know, removing the color gives you a little bit of less information so you can really appreciate and see what's inside the wood. Like, you know, I don't think I've said that before, but it's like black and white photography for a portrait is, I find, much more interesting than a color photo because the color is gone and you really get into the details. That's the mess. That's what I got, you know. And it rarely looks a whole lot better. I'm working on a lot of pieces at the same time. My attention span can be limited, which means I do 15 minutes of this and 15 minutes of this. And by the time I do get it all done, but I don't get bored. So lots of pieces in process. It's a little hard to walk around, but I do know where most of my tools are. The moment I clean up, I don't know where my tools are, so it really doesn't. So this is more recent, and we're getting into some other pieces here. So I did throw in some pictures of some baskets, but so these are much taller pieces. This series is called Song of the Bones. I didn't throw in titles. I work hard on titles. I'm really bad at it. It takes me a lot of time. It always, pretty much comes afterwards when most pieces. And again, with the titles, I try to leave a lot of space. You know, I don't want to lock it down too much. So these pieces here are, you know, you see in the front. So what happened, I cut them on the bandsaw. Again, everything green. And then I make my little cuts. It's all just by hand. I don't have a jig or anything like that. And what happens, they need to be cut very evenly, and then I dry these incredibly slowly, because if you do that, they don't fit in the microwave. So I stick them in paper bags, in triple layer feed bags. I raise goats, so I have a lot of these kind of bags, and I stick them in there and stick them inside of plastic. And this is really the way, even for wood turn, if you turn green and you want to dry something slowly, you stick it in a paper bag inside a plastic bag. So the paper will absorb a little bit of moisture, but it can only absorb so much. So next day, you take it out of the wet bag, stick it in a dry bag, put it back in the plastic bag. So it pulls the moisture out slowly while maintaining equilibrium within the piece of wood. Wood cracks if an area is wetter than another. That's the only reason. Something has already, the water's going out, but further in it does not. So if it's cracks on the surface, and then you get the stresses will crack the wood apart. So you see down here, it doesn't always work. Sometimes the stresses in the wood are so strong, it will split apart, and then you just need to deal with it. And over there in that piece, it's called a bridge, I use a lot of wedges to kind of bring it back in. Whoops. Okay, whatever, similar piece. So this is the stuff when it's been bleached. So this is sitting in the shop. I'm putting the first coats of lacquer on. I just put the bleach on, and I use a lot of masking tape. I rarely draw with a pencil on wood. Everything is masking tape, because the surfaces are rough and you can't get that pencil mark back out. So I always walk around whatever I kind of trim down till I'm at the finished pieces. Now here's a whole other series that is coming on. I got these long leg, because it's like, okay, what else can this wood do for me? How else can I work it and find, find a nice kind of image and make pieces by using what the wood has, what it can give to me. So there's books, there's these pieces, there's Song of the Bones, and there's those long-legged ones called Exercises in Zen. Sometimes you just, call them long legs gets a little old. So those are fascinating when you see them open, because I take this block and I cut those legs and I just stand them upside down. And then the outer legs come down. And 3-4 hours later, you start coming on the inside ones. And some of them open way up, and then next day you come in, and they all come back together and look like brooms. But some of them stay out, and I throw little wedges in for them to stay that way. And but they do have a shipping problem. And sometimes the grain within a burl goes every which way. So even though they're long, and some of the grain goes straight, in some areas the grain just goes out the side, and you suddenly have no strength in these pieces. But I like the gestures. So I leave my tool marks, always. I love tool marks from the chainsaw, from the bandsaw, and on the turning, I always leave my tool marks from the tool, from the gouge, not tear out, just the tool marks, just what, how it's been made. And then that is the finished piece. So you see a little cracking in there. Actually, since the photo was done, I actually sewed that back together. Then it doesn't, right now you go, oh, that's defective. You put the little thread on there, everything's fine, you're off the hook. Then I do a fair amount, once you start cutting these big blocks out of a big burl, you've got a shitload of leftovers. So what do you do with them? So I go in there, trim them with a saw, just make pieces, and then let them dry. And this is, I just put them in the sun. We've had a week of 108 this year, so it gets hot where we are. And you put that in the sun, and now I'm dealing with the cracking. So on thicker pieces, on thin pieces, I slow it down. I want the movement. On thicker pieces, I don't want, it won't move, it'll just crack. So then I force the cracking. You can put them, I've used to put pieces in the oven to just really make it crack all over. And when you combine that with, I don't know whether I have those pictures in here, where you have an area that's thick and another it's thin, the thin part moves, the thick part stays the way I've made it, just cracks. And, I love cracking patterns. So that what we have here, where the bottom was solid, but then the rest really starts moving. I do a lot of groupings, I like relationships, and see here how the focus is on those little, bamboo skewers with the linen thread. The focus is on the defects. I don't like perfect people. I don't like perfect wood. I'm much more interested in the imperfection, what makes us who we are, and to focus on that. It's like Same if you kind of turn something and you had a void or a crack and you put super glue in and, please don't look at it. No, put red epoxy in it, do something, really make it jump out, and it's a creative opportunity. Yeah, see here, this was all taken from one block, and I just made cut, 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 and let it dry, and then the thin part does the movement. This is called Desert Sharks. I do remember some of my titles. And then the sandblasting, what you have when straight madrone, or fairly straight madrone dries, these areas here, there is a ripple because of the harder wood and the softer wood, or winter wood and summer wood. And then you sandblast that, and it really feels like it's been around and has an aged feeling. And I really like those kind of surfaces. The incredible delight of dancing naked. See, sometimes titles you just have to kind of play around a little bit. And I didn't affect this at all. I mean, it really just did that all by itself. And then when I saw what that did, I made a whole lot more pieces, and they all turned into brooms. And again, it's perfect kindling at that point. And, once in a while it's called in stride. It can just get a lot of movement. So I'm interested in the movement. I always hope something makes it so it kind of moves through space. So each one ends up telling a story. And then once in a while, a leg breaks up, and you can still go in there and stitch it back together. That becomes then the strongest place. And I made, for 10 years, I made a lot of baskets. I tried counting it once. We're talking like, 15,000 baskets, something in different sizes. A lot of collections, a lot of it. And it's probably, again, the most basic, simple wood turning you can do. It's just a green piece of block of madrone. Make a form, a simple form, not a complicated form, because the wood will move. If you get too elaborate, it looks pretty weird. So I came up with the simplest form, and the first ones I saw at Chihuly Basket Exhibit, where he puts all of them together, and I go, okay, multiples. And, it's a really different material, but, there's so much to the surface. Suddenly the surfaces are not smooth. This has never seen sandpaper. This is really just straight from the lathe, and then you dry them slow. And none of them stand up straight. Most turned vessels never get used anyway. I don't understand why they always have to stand straight. So these, and they form a little grouping. This like becomes a family. And I sold a lot of those to people who don't like wood, into glass, into something else, because it didn't have that, super shiny, perfect kind of surface. And that's madrone. There are a few other woods you could do it with, but you have to start digging up the roots. And I don't dig up the roots. Luckily, somebody else digs these up. So to get like a big root like you saw at the beginning takes a lot of big equipment. I mean, you need carbide-tipped chainsaws that can cut the roots in the ground. You need backhoes to actually pull these out. Power washing equipment. They have these, I went into this yard when, economy was better, and there was like 20 burls sitting upside down. And they go into that, first they, with the roots sticking up, so they go in there, flip them up, going with a power washer with jackhammers to get the stones out, carbide-tipped chainsaws to trim this. That's a very macho environment. Then sometimes the burl goes up higher in the tree, and then you get these kind of colors. It gets kind of wilder, and here a bit of a detail. So I always, even sometimes when there's no crack like this in there, I might go in there and create a crack just to bring that story in, just to be able to get that thread in there and give it a bit of a story. It's been somewhere. So a couple pictures of an exhibit I have at the Fuller Museum. You don't see the size. This is 22 feet long. So all the panels cut from the same block and then arranged in that nature. Each of these is about 2 by 2 feet. So again, a large piece. And you can see the changes, again, all cut from the same block. And that, everything moves a little different. And I'm pretty sure that this is actually in line in the way that, there it starts and then it moves kind of this way, and then the changes go, and it always does a little bit of something different. So I've been doing quite a few. I've been really lucky in the last year and a half. I've been working for a couple of design companies making stuff for hotels. I had a commission for a hotel in China, Las Vegas, and it's like, I can make with these pieces, you can make any size. You can really fill a lot of space. And if you get the look at what happens with the lighting, that becomes really interesting. So I've been really lucky. Having turned and chainsawed for 25 years, my body isn't so happy about wood turning anymore, or chainsaws, or any of that. So I'm finding easier ways to do that. This is called an epic journey. There's like these 4 figures in there, but the photo is not that great. Feel like tattoos, landscape area. It's a bit of a story in there. This is called Uprising. So what you get here, you can see the trunk. This is actually the straight. Most of them are upside down because the more exciting stuff happens on the top. That's where the root comes out. And then I've been doing quite a few of these. They're called rocks and trees. So I have a very wild panel, and these were actually like end grain, so it formed its own bowl. Like 2/3 of these totally cracked apart, but some stayed. And then I've been making these, rocks, but they're actually hollow turned. So I take I turn a ball, I separate it, I hollow it out, I put a little step in there, glue it back together, carve it, and then dry it very, very slowly so that that seam doesn't open up. So each one of those, just forms itself again according to its grain structure, and then I burn it. There's a lot of steps involved. And so we got a few more pictures here of like recent work. This is called nesting. Martine's horses. What do you do with 6,000 pounds of wood? You made 5 of that, and then you made 5 of that, and then you go, well, there's all this material, which I will not keep. I mean, a year max, and the pieces that I have 1 block left this big, and it's starting to be purple, and it's starting to crack, even though it's been in plastic for so long. So you got to work pretty fast. So I could never form that. I could never make this lovely kind of pattern that happens in there. That is all done by letting it dry, just kind of slowly, and letting it do what it needs to do. So, times I let the wood do what it needs to do. At other ones, I try to harness what is in there and control it just to a point. So this area was completely cracked. And I wetted it all down and added some wedges in there just to stabilize it so that actually the curves were complete. And then afterwards, like, okay, I like these wedges. Actually, somebody else came by and liked the wedges. I said, you're nuts. I hate them. You look at it long enough, you go, let's play with them. And so now the wedges in there, I still don't quite understand them, but I'm working on it. So this is a piece, this is a brother. Actually, that piece was the inside of this one. This is like 3.5 feet. It's called the bridge. So, people, I don't know. There's a lot of work I do, and it kind of mystifies me. Where I start with an idea, and then let's see what happens, and then you look at it. It's done its drying. Where do I go from now? And to me, the creative process is a lot about elimination. And trying to be as broad as possible. So I got 100 ideas I could deal with, and then I go chop them, remove them, till I end up with the one that I really like, that I find the most exciting, and then go from there. So this process keeps moving along as I work, and at the end I go, well, what is this? What have I created? I'm not always sure. So, but feeling true at all times to the idea, and I think it's important that you stay as open as possible and don't get too narrow, where you just have, I just have a few options here. So I play a lot, which is again, about burning. I make a lot of pieces I just play with, see what happens. And sometimes they work. This is some new work. This is like in process, this is drying. Here the wedges are really to keep the stuff apart. The cracking is just outrageous down below. And through the sandblasting, you can actually open that up. And here's the finished piece, or one of them. And this is like 5 feet tall. Yeah, I think this is the same one that it showed in the photo. And so it's called Wrestling with the Riddle. And it's always, I'm always dealing with what do you do with the solid pieces, with the thin pieces, how do you get that together? How do you anchor the movement to something more solid? And at this point, actually, my wife makes fun of me that no piece is safe till it's in the crate. Because I was ready to go in the crate, and then I took it back out, and actually there's a whole burning pattern that comes down here on both sides. It's the same when pieces come back from the show. I often rework pieces, if I feel it's necessary. Not everything, but suddenly I go, oh, I've learned something in the 2 years till it was traveling or whatever, it comes back from the gallery, let's apply that. I think I'm done. Okay, do you have any questions? Depends on thickness. I mean, like this piece, I mean, I made it about, I made that in the spring. It's been sitting outside. I know it's going to a show. I know there's water in the middle of it. There's no way, and I can't control that, But nothing will happen anymore because the outer structure has locked itself down, is hard, and the inside, the moisture will just come out really slow. I mean, I've had blocks, beams from somewhere that were just cut like 10, 15 years ago, and the inside was still wet. They're microwaved. They're done in 2 days. Except, the back of the book takes longer. And you can't microwave them past a point because you burn them. I burn a lot of books. You leave them in just a little too long and you get that smell because you want them to dry faster. But, once it's dry, it will just burn.
And have you tried this process with other trees, with other worlds?
Nope. Nope. I love this stuff. I'm good. I will, and sometimes somebody brings you something, but I've tried a bunch of other stuff and it just didn't do it. And then it's like, I don't, this works for me. I really want to take this as far as I can with this kind of material, and there's no shipping involved. I mean, this comes from an hour where I am. I don't have to import anything. And I have so much of it that it gives me the freedom to play. I'm not all that precious about it. Let's just go, I have an idea, let's just go do it. And I have the time to do that. 60 mesh sand. No, you can go finer, but 60 mesh seems about right. It's a little expensive these days. It used to be a bag of sand used to be like $5, $6, and that's like 15. And I do recycle it. I mean, I'm outside, I create this big pile, and then we sieve some of that and use it again. But I create a little beach behind my shop. You can go. A friend of mine just takes 00, which is like totally super fine, but that gets incredibly dangerous. I mean, dealing with sandblasting with sand is a problem. I am totally covered. I mean, I got all kinds of apparatus and all that kind of stuff because you sit in this cloud of sand. I don't think my neighbors are too hot when I sandblast. It's noisy. The compressor is going, and it's noisy. I mean, sandblasting under hood outside with this, big hose, and it comes out a lot of pressure. It's intense. I hate it. I really don't like it. Because after 2 hours, you're wiped out and you got sand. No matter what you wear, sand is everywhere. But it's hard. So, but I like what it does to the surface. I wouldn't know how else really to go about that. It gives it that feeling that it's been sandblasted. It's been sitting around. It's old. It comes along with it. I can't possibly have said everything.
Have you ever experimented with the non-silica-based blasting media, or
too expensive? Yeah. You can do that if you can recycle it. Actually, what I should say is like all the panels, I don't sandblast anymore. I give them to somebody else who does that. I mean, I go through a lot of panels, and it's just tedious. My compressor isn't that big, but these pieces I do, and he uses aluminum oxide. But he works within a chamber, and so he recycles that again. After a while, you sit there, it just gets really old. and because they're all flat and all the same, you know, I can tell them exactly what I need. Because what happens with the bleaching, you do need to remove everything that's not wood. So any bark, anything like that has to go because it won't bleach. You know, a little piece of bark just go yellow. So, you know, he uses that, and he is amazing. He can do that so fast. I mean, he sits in there. I think he watches TV and sees what he's doing. I don't know how, but and he doesn't charge a lot, so I'm good with that. But all the sculptural pieces I do because there's some areas I need to stay in a lot longer. I need to be really careful. Like on these in between, it was really hard because there's saw marks in there. Sometimes you get purple saw marks. You go in there and open that up and get in there. It's just incredibly noisy. Well, thank you very much. I did good. 50 minutes.